Coming up, a former Alabama star lays into an ESPN analyst, and LSU coach Ed Orgeron gives some hope for the Tigers. It's all on the way next on SEC Country Live. So I have to admit, I didn't realize I was on camera there as to start the show. The monitor's off to the side, so I can't quite see it out of my peripheral vision. But nonetheless, I can't see you either, but I'm really happy to have you here for SEC Country Live here today. My name is Brandon Adams. We're going to talk about everything going on around the SEC over the course of the next few minutes together. Before we're done, we're going to bring on a special guest, kind of a fancy analytics type guy, who's going to explain why he sees a big-time breakout star in the SEC from quite possibly a little bit of an unusual place, so we'll do that before we're done. We'll have a lot of your comments on both Facebook and YouTube, so thanks for tuning in here today. And I want to begin with this, though. And this is our Above the Fold. It's the big story, I think, happening around the SEC here today. And I know many of you may kind of think, well, this is just sort of the typical viral content of, you heard this crazy thing this guy said on a podcast, and you kind of run with it and have some fun with it. And to a degree, that's what we're doing here. But I actually think there's an even more substantial takeaway from the audio that I'm about to play for you. Former Alabama running back Najee Harris made an appearance on the Adam Schefter podcast, and Schefter had the brilliant idea of, hey, as a way of kind of being wacky and zany, let me read to Najee some of the comments from guys like Mel Kiper and Todd McShay, the ESPN NFL draft experts. Let me read Najee their scouting report of him. We'll find out what Najee has to say about that. Well, Najee did not like something that ESPN's Todd McShay said, and he did not hold back in kind of explaining why he was unhappy about this. So this is really funny. This is Adam Schefter, you know him. Najee Harris, the former Alabama running back, you know him there as well. You probably know Todd McShay too, and apparently Najee Harris doesn't much like Todd McShay. Take a listen to this.
We're going to do something fun before the NFL draft, where I'm going to read you the draft reports from Mel Kiper Jr. and Todd McShay. You tell me what you think of their reports, Najee. Ready? Harris has excellent size and decent top-end speed. He was a much more decisive runner as a senior, showing oily hips for a big back and playing light on his feet. Harris showed tremendous improvement as a pass catcher in 2020 with a big catch radius and an ability to adjust to balls thrown outside his frame. What do we think of Todd McShay's report, Najee?
I think that he can kiss my ass. What I'm saying with this is like, listen, like, how is he going to say he showed better production? I did not play freshman and sophomore year, rarely. Ever. So I didn't have the opportunity to show I can catch. It's not because I can't. It's because I wasn't in the game to show people I can catch. So let's just stop looking at a stat sheet there and watch the game, you know? Let's watch the game and not a stat sheet. That's what I was saying to you guys.
So I kind of edited some of that down. You know, McShay said a lot more. Najee Harris had a lot more of a response to what McShay said, but I want to just kind of give you a little bit of a gist of it. First of all, how much of a dork does Adam Schefter come across in this with the kind of phony, forced laughter here? You know, very uncomfortable listening to Najee Harris rip one of his colleagues. And how much do you hate like the draft phrases that are so popular this time of year of he's got oily hips. Like, who says that about another man? But that's apparently what McShay says about Najee Harris there. But it's actually the bigger takeaway is the fact that McShay says that he thinks that Najee Harris became a better receiver over the course of his time there in Alabama, and that's why McShay favors him in the upcoming NFL draft. And Najee doesn't like that part of it because he says, listen, I barely played in my first couple of years there on campus. How are you going to make that comparison all the way around there? And to a degree, I kind of understand where Najee's coming from this, and I had a chance to have Azeez Ojulari, the former Georgia linebacker, on my show a little earlier this week, my other show, Dog Nation Daily, where I talk Georgia football exclusively. And we're talking with Azeez about, what's it like to, you put good football on film for a couple of years, and Najee Harris, certainly in this particular situation, is no different. All of a sudden, you got guys who didn't play the game doing podcasts and TV shows, things like that, and talking about how oily your hips are, or, what you did, and, these kind of evaluations for guys who feel like that they've put good football on film. And frankly, in a lot of cases, guys who've never had anything but complimentary things said about them. That's the other part of this that's weird. In addition to the weird nature of some of the analysis on some of this kind of stuff, there's also just the weird nature of if you're a former 5-star running back in the major recruiting battle that Alabama won over Michigan to get Najee Harris on campus. The entire time you've been playing football, you've got nothing but praise. But now in the kind of pre-draft process, and Najee's not the only guy who deals with this, but in the pre-draft process, there's that sort of natural criticism. We sort of talk more about why guys shouldn't be drafted high, more so than we talk about why they should be drafted high. And I'm sure for Najee, that's all, very, very difficult to deal with. And it's kind of funny to hear him take the jab there at McShane. I'm sure a lot of other prospects over the years probably would have liked to have done the same thing. However, I told you before that me playing this on the show is kind of about more than just did you hear the crazy thing that the former Bama guy said on the ESPN Dudes podcast? It's more than that. When you listen to Najee talk right there, here's the one thing I think that you kind of take from that. Najee's clearly a big personality. Najee's clearly a guy that's got something to say and got some intensity to him just a bit, and I think he has a little bit of an edge about the fact that he wasn't playing very much in those first couple seasons on campus. And one of the things that kind of reminds me of is something that we once talked about years ago on SEC Country Live. Do you remember in the summer of 2018? This is after Najee had gotten a chance to really be featured in Alabama's national championship win against Georgia at the end of the 2017 season. You would have thought that Najee was kind of coasting through that offseason and basking in the glow, what was kind of going to be a sort of a big-time second year in Tuscaloosa with him with the Crimson Tide. But his actual mood was a little bit different than that. Some of you who are Alabama fans may remember this. Some of you who are SEC fans in general, you may remember some of this. Najee was quoted in the San Francisco Chronicle that summer essentially saying, I thought about transferring. I'm not playing as much as I want to at Alabama. I kind of thought about transferring, kind of thought about leaving that program. Even on the heels of being a hero, one of the heroes for Alabama in that national championship game win, he still kind of told one of the biggest newspapers in the country, I'm not too happy in Tuscaloosa. I've thought about going somewhere else. And yet, lo and behold, all those years later, Najee did stay in Tuscaloosa, seemingly happy enough that he was able to kind of grow into his role there. And this past season, the story kind of writes itself. He was one of the main reasons why Alabama won the national championship. I think that's really amazing, and I think it speaks to the job that Nick Saban has done when it comes to kind of cultivating a certain kind of team chemistry. Now, listen, let me just be very honest for a moment. Some of y'all know that I do Dog Nation daily and I talk Georgia football. Admittedly, I am a Georgia fan. I don't hide from that. I don't try to trick you into thinking that I'm some sort of call it right down the middle objective dude. I'm just a college football fan like any of y'all are. I like talking college football. I like having a favorite college football team, and that's going to come up from time to time on this show. So with that in mind, when I say something complimentary like that about Nick Saban, I sort of wish it wasn't true. I mean, I think a lot of us who are not Alabama fans have just kind of gotten tired of the Crimson Tide, frankly, kind of gotten tired of Nick Saban. You're sort of ready for something new in college football, and frankly, it's a little bit more interesting to find something wrong with Saban in Alabama than it is to once again kind of join the pylon of saying, wow, this is how good Nick Saban is. But in this specific instance, I do think it is worth mentioning specifically why Nick Saban is good and specifically what Nick Saban does, in some cases better than what other programs around the country are going to be able to do. In a day and age in which transfers, and this is 2018 in which Najee Harris first said this, now here we are in 2021 where on the basketball side of things, there are more than 1,000 players right now in the transfer portal. There are certainly tons of football players there as well, guys being impatient, being unhappy, not wanting to wait for playing time, not wanting to wait for a chance at stardom. That is the common occurrence in college football right now. Yet with Najee Harris, big personality, a guy who clearly wanted his time to shine, didn't think he got enough of that in his freshman year, Nick Saban found a way to keep him happy, found a way to let him work his way up the ranks, very deep running back situation there when it comes to the Alabama Crimson Tide, and eventually Najee became a big part of a national championship team. This is an area in which Saban has been better than almost anybody else. Saban, has been able to keep guys patient, keep them coming back to school when, and in some cases, other programs would have had guys leave and go to the NFL. I get bored by saying this is how good Saban is, but in this particular instance, you have to admit this truly is how good Nick Saban is. All right, we got plenty more SEC talk to come. As I said before, special guest on our show before we're done here today. I also want to take some time to get some of your comments there as well. So we'll hop over here and get some of these here on Facebook and we'll do some YouTube stuff there as well, and plenty more SEC talk on the way here on SEC Country Live here today. Good to see folks going back and forth in the comment section. Tennille Calvina already giving somebody a shut up in here, so you always kind of like to see that. People having a good time going back and forth with each other. Y'all don't talk about politics, though. I mean, I realize politics is everywhere. I realize it's even kind of infiltrating the world of sports, but we're doing everything we can on a show like this to make it be about what's happening on the field, make it be about what's happening, what people are doing for the fun part of this. So let's try to keep that going and see if we can maybe easier said than done. A lot of politics type stuff in the comment section. We're going to try to have some fun with this nonetheless and have a good time. Good to see Cliff Nelson checking in, LSU fan. We've got some LSU talk coming up here just in a couple of minutes. Susan Wilburn checking in. She's an Alabama fan. Good to see that. Travis McCullough checking in there as well. John Fullwater also saying the same thing, wanting to leave the politics out of the discussion. Yeah, I mean, that's just what we want to be able to do. And it's not that politics isn't important. It's not the kind of thing that at some point in time you probably should be paying attention to. And everybody's got an opinion, and in some cases, folks' opinions are different. But as a service to people who just want to break from it, who just want to get away from it from time to time, that's what we're going to try to be able to do here on this show. Denise Patterson also checking in to give you a Roll Tide. John Jasek also checking in on the idea of the oily hips. Yeah, I mean, listen, no matter who you vote for, I think you can all agree that describing another football player as having oily hips, as we heard Adam Schefter reading off the Todd McShay scouting report a moment ago, I think we can all agree that's just a little bit weird. So no matter where your voting persuasion may lie, that's one thing in which all Americans can be united on. Can we stop describing football players having oily hips? Jeremy Pettis says Bama wins back-to-back again. And, look, there's a very good chance they will. Here's one of the things, though, Jeremy, that's going to come up on the show today and the weeks coming. By the way, for those of you who are just kind of tuning in on this, we are here right now every Wednesday at 3 p.m. So here's the other thing that's going to kind of come up related to some of this. Just talked about Najee Harris a good bit a moment ago. And you think about Mac Jones, who's also a big part of the NFL draft conversation as you head towards the end of this month. And obviously Steve Sarkisian, now head coach at Texas. I do think it's worth giving some consideration to that with the SEC West looking a little deeper. A&M, I think, is on the scene here, and they're not going away for a while. LSU, we're going to talk about the Tigers in a moment. The idea that there's a lot of credence being given to this potentially being about a bounce-back season for LSU. We'll wait and see about some of the other first- and second-year coach programs in the SEC West, but just with LSU and Texas A&M alone, a little bit of a threat, a little bit of a challenge to the Crimson Tide, and showing that the replacement for Sarkisian, the replacement for Mac Jones, the replacement for Najee Harris, showing that that's all going to be a seamless transition. The early returns on Bryce Young have certainly been very good. What was it? Supposedly threw 4 touchdowns in the scrimmage the other day, and obviously think about guys like Brian Robinson, maybe healthy Trey Sanders and others, kind of stepping in there for that running game situation, but the Steve Sarkisian offense worked so well a year ago. The Steve Sarkisian offense was so efficient a year ago. Even if the guy you have to replace him is a former NFL head coach, and that's as prominent a hire as any program is going to be able to make, even if that's the situation that you're dealing with, it is still not an obvious rubber stamp situation that the stat line for the Tide in 2021 looks as impressive and gaudy as it did in 2020. It's just not quite that easy to be able to get that done. And Chris Back kind of agrees with that, by the way, saying the lack of experience for Alabama quarterback means no national championship. Now, Mac Jones wasn't incredibly experienced before this upcoming season, but it is at least worth considering that asking a guy in Bryce Young, who hasn't really done it before, to be as good as what recent national championship quarterbacks have been. In the case of Joe Burrow, number 1 overall pick. Trevor Lawrence, who won it in 2018, eventually a number 1 overall pick. The current, benchmark for how good you have to be to win a national championship as a quarterback, and we're going to talk about this more later on in the show as it relates to Georgia. The current kind of benchmark for all that is so high that, boy, you're really asking a lot from Bryce Young or anyone. You're asking kind of step into that spotlight and be able to do all that kind of stuff. Travis McCullough says he thinks that A&M might be more dangerous than what they're getting credit for. We'll talk some Aggies before we're done on the program here today. Let me say hello to the folks on YouTube, too, and then I want to get into LSU here a little bit as we get ready to do our All Points Bulletin here in just a moment. Cliff Nelson checking in on both the comment sections, by the way. He's over there on the YouTube side of things there as well. It's always great to see Cliff. He asks, does Najee Harris go in the first round? I would assume that Najee Harris is probably a first-round running back, I would assume. I'm not as great with the mock draft stuff as some people are, but I'm assuming that Najee's probably a first-round running back. Also great to see G. Grace Bama Boy checking in over here on the YouTube comment section. He says that Bama won't miss a beat without Sarkisian. Kiffin and others left, and we're still top 5 on offense in the nation. And that part is certainly true, that Alabama has cycled through a good bit of offensive coordinators as of late. In the aftermath of Lane Kiffin, you replace him with Brian Dable. Dable's proven to be a great offensive mind, did big things with the Buffalo Bills a year ago. Loxley was good in his turn to be able to do that. And then Steve Sarkisian really kind of got it rolling there as well. Maybe it is just that simple with Bill O'Brien. Maybe that's exactly how that's going to play out. We shall have to wait and see. Here on SEC Country Live, we'll have more of your comments coming up. I do want to roll on here now, though, and do our All Points Bulletin for a moment as we kind of hit some of the other big stories around the SEC. And this one's flying under the radar just a little bit, but I think it's worth paying attention to. You know, you may remember over the course of the offseason, at one point in time, if you want to go back to the end of last year, when former 5-star tight end Arik Gilbert, who signed with LSU, who showed some flashes of brilliance during his first year on campus there in Baton Rouge, but also showed some signs of unhappiness. It was reported by LSU coach Ed Orgeron at the time that Gilbert was going to kind of opt out for the remainder of the season. He described him as wanting to rest his body. It was commonly assumed, though, by many people on social media and around message boards and things like that Gilbert was looking to transfer. And eventually that's exactly what he did do, at least putting his name in the transfer portal, then announcing a transfer to Florida, only to, lo and behold, change his mind on that. Plenty of reports coming out of Gainesville that his reason for not landing with the Gators officially and enrolling in class and all the things that go along with that was due to some academic concerns. And so ever since the decision to decommit from Florida went down for Gilbert, we've been kind of in a holding pattern what was going to happen for one of the best young dynamic playmakers in the SEC. But a new data point in all of this came within the last couple of days when LSU coach Ed Orgeron was asked if he had had any recent contact with his former potentially future star at tight end, Arik Gilbert. And Orgeron said, yes, we have. And apparently Orgeron very much leaving the door open for a possible Arik Gilbert return. This, interesting from Ed Orgeron. Take a listen to it.
Yeah, Arik did come. We had a very good meeting. There's been no decision been made. He was happy. Everybody was happy to see him. We checked with compliance to make sure that everything that he was doing was on the up and up. When he come meet him, he could come talk to us. He left. He hasn't made a decision yet. Hasn't told us anything yet. I think it's still up in the air, but it was a very positive day when he came.
I think a story like this should probably be getting a little bit more attention than it currently is. And part of the reason I think that's true is if you go back and watch Gilbert from when he was in high school, I live in the Atlanta area. Gilbert is from the Atlanta area. He went to Marietta High School, wanted to come to the power programs here in this area. And you look at how polished he was as a receiving target even when he was in high school. And he had the benefit of having Harrison Bailey as his quarterback, Bailey now at Tennessee. So he was working with an SEC caliber quarterback in high school, and that always helps when you want to put up big, gaudy receiving stats. But just watching and isolating Gilbert alone, you were able to really identify a guy who just brought a lot of talent to the table. And I think LSU fans, we have a lot who are watching us right now, I think they would say that when they saw Gilbert play this year, they saw some of that in games, some of the same kind of stuff that we had seen from Gilbert in high school. And listen, Kyle Pitts has the huge year for Florida, and all of a sudden now because of that, tight end play is really in vogue, and everybody wants their own version of what Kyle Pitts was for Florida last year, which is really much more than just a tight end, a guy who has the size to play tight end, but the athleticism to really be an extra receiver on the field. And Gilbert kind of feels like that for LSU. You might say Darnell Washington has a chance to be that for Georgia. You can mention a few guys around the SEC who potentially kind of fit that mold, but clearly Gilbert may be as prominent as a potential next Kyle Pitts as anybody. In fact, that's maybe one of the reasons why he was initially considering going to Florida. I'm sure part of the sales pitch that he got from Dan Mullen down there was, hey, come here and be the next Kyle Pitts. But whether it's academic related or whatever else, and there's no shortage of rumors related to that, Florida's not the place he's going to end up. And I kind of openly speculated for a while. well, if he's not going to go to Florida, then maybe it just kind of makes sense that maybe he would go back to LSU. Sometimes it's just a little bit easier if you're trying to figure some stuff out, especially if it's related to academic transcripts, things along those lines. Sometimes it is just a little bit easier to figure some of that kind of stuff out at your current school where you're currently located. That just maybe just a little bit easier. And according to Ed Orgeron, that's exactly what may be going on here, that they're working to see it. Is it okay that we're talking here? Is it okay we're chatting? He gets the thumbs up on that. Of course, those compliance folks at LSU pretty busy with a lot of things right now, it would seem. But nonetheless, he kind of gets the blessing to have that conversation, and now it's ongoing. It is important to note, though, in the audio that you just heard, Orgeron certainly doesn't acknowledge that, this is a done deal or even trending that way. He makes it clear that he's not sure what Gilbert's going to do, but also I think we would take from this pretty clear that LSU would like to have Arik Gilbert back. And frankly, if it does go down this way, to me, it would be a little bit of a correction for what was, I would describe as kind of an unforced error. When Gilbert first was, I guess, making some, thought process about maybe he's leaving, I thought the way in which Ed Orgeron kind of described his opt-out situation really didn't do Gilbert much in the way of favor. By saying that he wanted to rest his body, it almost made it seem to some people, is Gilbert soft? Is he not not capable of handling the physicality of the SEC? In fact, there were even some former LSU players who kind of took to their own social media or media campaign and had some somewhat unkind things to say about Gilbert related to this, but it wasn't Gilbert's own words they were responding to. It was Orgeron's description of Gilbert that was kind of the catalyst for that discussion. So it seems like in this particular case, what could have potentially worked against LSU in terms of bringing Gilbert back is actually going to maybe work out okay, and it seems like they may still be in a position to once again retain the services. And you can look all over the internet right now. There's all kinds of, and I love the off-season content. I love the who's going to do what, and, which teams do you expect to kind of bounce back this year? There's a lot of who's going to bounce back type topics around the internet right now, and there's no question. There's no question that one of the most prominently mentioned teams in that kind of likelihood of bouncing back, likelihood of being a factor in the upcoming season, you see LSU mentioned there a lot. And that's before anybody knew what was going to happen with Arik Gilbert. If you add Gilbert as a playmaker to what LSU already has going on there, all of a sudden I think it becomes a lot easier to really consider LSU as a team that's going to be a factor in the SEC West race. But in addition to that, LSU also stands as that permanent crossover opponent for Florida in the SEC East. LSU is one of those swing teams in the SEC. Think about Brian Harsin in his first year at Auburn. Big road game early in the season at LSU. That's a place that Auburn hasn't won since 1999. It's also a pretty tough schedule for Harsin in his first year there. What you're able to do on the road at LSU, you also got the road game there at Penn State, that matters. So when you think about what LSU is going to be for the upcoming season, as a bounce-back team, as one of the more talented teams in the conference, as one of those teams that's going to show up in top 25, is going to show up in the the list of teams that are going to be looking to improve on their record from a year ago. When you think about all of that, when you kind of put all that in place, it's not just LSU's own story that's impacted by that. It's also the other teams that LSU has to play. And as the Tigers go this year, as the Tigers show improvement this year, figure some things out at quarterback with Brendan back from injury and Max Johnson potentially on the rise there a little bit. As all of that works its way out in Baton Rouge, by the way, LSU's still going through spring practice right now. As all of that plays out, the rest of the SEC is certainly watching very closely. Ed Orgeron last year kind of seemed like a coach that a year removed from a national championship that you wondered how much he was going to gain from that. And obviously 2020 was not the follow-up you want to have as a defending national champion. But I think anyone who kind of speaks about the demise of Orgeron at LSU, speaks about the erosion of that program, kind of now a little bit more than a year removed from what Joe Burrow, Joe Brady were able to do there in 2019, anyone who kind of hastens that conversation, I think is kind of missing the point here. I do think that LSU is one of the potential bounce-back teams in the country for this upcoming season. And I think a big part of that could certainly be enhanced if Arik Gilbert also makes his decision to return there to LSU there as well. What do you say we keep our all-points bulletin going here after being in Baton Rouge, Louisiana to check on LSU? Let's head over to the east, Knoxville, Tennessee, and talk some Tennessee Vols here for a moment. And one of the things I think is really interesting about Tennessee is the way in which bad news is seemingly kind of piling up for the Vols at kind of the wrong time, and certainly making the transition, Josh Heupel, brand new Tennessee coach, making that much more difficult here. You may have followed the story this week of Aaron Beasley, a Tennessee linebacker, and I'll show you this tweet from Torrey Wallace, who covers Tennessee. So Aaron Beasley suspended indefinitely by the program while the university and police department investigated a claim of animal abuse. The official statement from Tennessee that they had received the incident report from the Knoxville Police Department. Aaron Beasley has been suspended indefinitely from all football team activities as we await further information. I believe within the last couple hours here, Beasley has now been cited on this animal cruelty charge. So that's kind of out there right now, and just an awful headline. And, even Vols fans themselves have, kind of been, pretty critical of Beasley for this. Somehow the accusation is that he allegedly abused a cat. It's just a strange story for a Tennessee program that's had so many bad headlines as it is. This is just kind of another addition to that. And Beasley, by my count, when he was suspended, became the 5th Tennessee player to be dealing with a suspension. Obviously, 4 guys were involved in the allegation of kind of an on-campus physical altercation. One of those guys is Caden Salter, 2021 quarterback signing. Now, it sounds like his involvement in this was a little maybe less than the other guys are. Salter has come out recently and issued an apology for his role in all of this. What Salter said on Twitter within the last day or so is that he wants to take the opportunity to apologize to his team, coaches, Vol fans, parents for my negative choices. I know my choices disappointed many, but my end goal is to eliminate my distractions, get on the field, and earn my respect back. It certainly seems like on the basis of this that Caden Salter may see a little bit of a path forward for himself, maybe a chance to be back and doing some things with the Tennessee Vols once again. It seems like that's a possibility, and frankly, I wouldn't prohibit him from being able to do that. I'd have no problem with him, potentially doing that, being welcome back in there. I mean, I think we're still trying to figure out what happened on campus with the fight, whatever it was, that I guess Salter was allegedly a part of. But, I'm not the kind of person that wants to hold that against him for the rest of his college career and say somehow this means that you can't be a quarterback at Tennessee for any of the other players, who've been suspended for their alleged role in all of this. I'm going to be really slow to condemn all of them either. My point in all of this is not to drag the players through the mud here. It's to talk about the challenge that Josh Heupel has awaiting him as he begins his Tennessee career. It's just really hard at Tennessee right now. They have 0 commits for the class of 2022. They have fewer than 70 scholarship players overall, 5 of those now suspended. Maybe soon to be less than that, but for now you're talking about 5 guys who were suspended. You've got Jeremy Pruitt gone shamefully at the end of his Tennessee career. Before that, Butch Jones, career gone shamefully. The Derek Dooley era before that. Patience is a finite resource, and Tennessee fans have been asked to extend patience to a bunch of coaches over the last however many years. Post Lane Kiffin, everybody that was supposed to be the coach going to get the Vols back on track, that guy proved not to be worth the patience that Tennessee fans were asked to show to him for that. And so all of a sudden now Josh Heupel shows up in the aftermath of the Jeremy Pruitt era, and he's going to ask for patience now too. And frankly, a lot of Tennessee fans are going to look around and say, we've already given our patience to the last guy, and we gave some of it to the guy before that. We need you to stop making Tennessee football embarrassing. But when you've got guys who've gotten in trouble, when you've got guys who are, we talked about Henry Toto and Quavaris Crouch, I think, on last week's show, when you've got guys who are considering going other places, the idea of making Tennessee less than embarrassing is just going to be a hard thing to do, especially for a guy like Josh Heupel. And here's the one thing that would have given me, very much pause if I was, looking to hire a guy like that in Knoxville to begin with. The fact of the matter is he wasn't recruiting that great at UCF before his time there in Orlando came to an end. All of a sudden he's supposed to come to Tennessee and upgrade that roster. It is a very, very difficult situation. And sometimes football is just simple. It's obviously complicated with the X's and O's and all the things related to that. But sometimes the actual discussion doesn't have to be much more simple than right now. Tennessee's biggest issue is they just don't have enough players. They are thin to even go through spring practice. The thought of playing a game with this small of a roster is not an easy thing to be able to do. We saw some of the teams that were dealing with that at the end of last year, and at the time some of that was COVID related. But it's just not easy to go out there and play when you have less than a full complement of players. And for a guy like Heupel, who there's already legitimate concerns, is he even big enough? Is his stature significant enough for a job of this magnitude? Is he ready for this gigantic stage? That's already a legitimate question. And now knowing that you've got guys who've been suspended, more guys getting in trouble this week, at least allegations of that, boy, uphill climb for Josh Heupel there at Tennessee, and especially with Vols fans who just don't have any more patience to be able to give. We've got more APP coming up here on SEC Country Live. We'll also talk to Dave Bartu from College Football Matrix before we're done. That's going to come up in about 15 minutes' time. Let me squeeze in a couple of your comments before we get ready to do that. G. Grace asking about Henry Toto, or I should say Toto. That's always a tough one for me to pronounce. Where is he going to end up? Yeah, G, you're great. Your guess is as good as mine on that. Enrique Morello says he's shocked that Toto's not announced some sort of transfer to Alabama yet. I don't know. We'll have to see where that's going to go. Other comments here in our YouTube comment section, a lot of folks weighing in. Good to see the back and forth in here today. That's always a lot of fun to be able to see. We'll check it on Facebook there as well as folks are talking and chatting. Chris Pack, good to see you in here. Moose Thames, by the way, his prediction for the SEC championship, Georgia, Texas A&M calling it here. People mock me because on my other show, Dog Nation Daily, I have been a little bit high on Texas A&M. But I'm telling you right now, Moose, and to anybody else who wants to be a part of this conversation, I absolutely believe that Texas A&M is capable of winning the SEC West. I'm not quite ready to make my prediction on that just yet in terms of will it be Bama, will it be the Aggies. But when you watch the way that A&M performed a year ago, we're going to talk some A&M before we're done on today's show. When you watch the way they performed a year ago, look, when Kevin Sumlin was Texas A&M's coach, this was very much a team kind of west of most of the rest of the SEC that played with a personality very much of the West. You know, the stench of the Big 12. Scoring a bunch of points, not playing much in the way of defense. That stench was hard to scrub off of A&M when they got in the SEC. They had the dynamic win at Bama in 2012, and in the early days of the rest of their tenure in the SEC, what did they really have to show for any of that? Not much at all, right? That one big moment, and you thought A&M was going to be a factor in the SEC for years and years to come, but it never really happened after that. And I would suggest the reason why is that A&M could not resemble under Sumlin, could not resemble what the rest of the SEC is all about. Even though you're scoring a bunch of points now, you still have to be tough on both lines of scrimmage. You've got to be able to run the football when it matters most, and that's not something A&M was doing for years and years and years. But the transformation that Jimbo Fisher has overseen there, I do think is pretty significant. Mike Elko is defensive coordinator. This is one of the best defensive minds in this league. So far, A&M's been able to hold on to him, even though there's been a lot of overtures about him eventually being a head coach. To this point, A&M's been able to hold on to him, and I think that's a really good thing. And the proof was in the pudding on the field a year ago, clearly playing much better defense. Also and we talked about this with Tony Barnhart on this show a week ago, with Spiller running the football, and of course, big recruiting wins when it comes to the running back position with Johnson, for the class of 2021. This is a team under Jimbo Fisher. Even though Jimbo's kind of known as a little bit more of a quarterback type guy, this is a team under Jimbo Fisher, finding its footing with the running game, finding its footing with the defense, making the Aggies program, the former Big 12 school that it is, now feel like a true full-fledged member of the SEC. So yeah, from that standpoint, I absolutely believe that they could, potentially win the SEC West here for this upcoming year. All right, a couple more comments. Bobby Armstrong checking in to say go Gators. We certainly appreciate that. We talked about Najee Harris a little bit early in the program. Kawana Moore checking in to say that Najee is going to have his time to show talent on the next level. Wishing him nothing but the best. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of Alabama fans looking forward to seeing what Najee is able to do there at that next level. Chris Pack, thanks for the kind words. I certainly appreciate that. Esteban Esteves said he'd love to see from the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. Yeah, we're going to try to get Mike on an upcoming show. Mike is very busy these days. For those of you who don't know, we've done this show for years. We were on hiatus for a good while, but we used to do this show years ago, and my co-host was Mike Johnson. Great former Alabama All-American. Many of you are Alabama fans know Mike well. And so Mike now is in coaching and doing all those kinds of things. He's really working in football full-time now, but we're going to try to get him on the show here very soon if we're able to do that. A couple more comments, and then I want to roll through the rest of our APB as we check in on some other SEC news here today. A lot of folks having some fun, doing some good stuff here. Tanel Calvino, no fan of the Florida Gators, and you always love to be able to see that. That's always fun to be able to see. Also, great comments going over here on the YouTube side of things there as well. So we'll keep that going. By the way, speaking of the Georgia Bulldogs, which somebody brought up a moment ago, let's keep the APB going for a moment here and talk about what we heard from Georgia quarterback JT Daniels a little earlier this week. Very interesting stuff. First of all, for those of you that follow Georgia, know Georgia very well, Georgia sometimes can be a very buttoned-up program. That means that you don't have quarterbacks speaking to media. Now, the average fan doesn't care about media stuff all that much. I understand that. But the Georgia program is usually very careful about how much it puts the quarterback out in front of the program, not always wanting that quarterback to be the mouthpiece, the spokesman for the team, because sometimes, and I think the assumption here is that Kirby Smart would say, sometimes that can lead to undue pressure on a quarterback, that we're not going to treat guys like they're the face of the program necessarily. Well, with JT Daniels this year, there's been a little bit of a break with typical protocol with that when it comes to Georgia. The other day in an Atlanta radio interview, Kirby Smart did kind of acknowledge that, yes, JT Daniels is our starting quarterback, and Georgia also gave Daniels some press time yesterday to be able to speak to reporters, and Daniels spoke very, very clearly about what the obvious goal is for UGA. Guys have come back for this. Obviously, the George Pickens injury is a little bit of a setback related to all of this. But JT made it very, very clear what Georgia is striving for this season. This is the Georgia quarterback.
There's no denying that you want to win a natty. I think we have the team to do it. Absolutely, it's a great team. I think we've done, and Coach Smart's done a really good job of instilling a team standard and team DNA that a lot of the guys have really taken accustomed to. There's a lot of good things going for the team. There's just things we got to focus on, things we got to develop, because we have the team, to do whatever we want.
So I think that it's really interesting to hear Daniel speaking the way that he speaks there, because obviously everyone would admit that, yeah, the next step for Georgia is to win a national championship, certainly to be more competitive for one. There's a certain, faction of Georgia fans that are going to look at the situation and say, at the end of the 2017 season, Georgia was playing for national championship. The following year, there was a little bit of regression of, well, it's not playing for national championship, but at least it was in the SEC title game and came close to beating Alabama. Then in 2019, the SEC title game, they were back there again, but this time it wasn't a close loss. This time it was a blowout loss to LSU. And then in 2020, Georgia wasn't in the title game there at all. There is a little bit of end-of-season regression that Georgia's unfortunately dealt with, if you're a UGA fan, over the course of these last few years. And JT Daniels, kind of in no uncertain terms there, says this is the year that's supposed to come to an end. This is the year that's supposed to kind of go back the other way, that we're here and we're back here, as he says, because we want to try to win a natty. And look, I think that as we head towards the upcoming season and through the summer and everything that kind of builds up towards that, I think that Georgia, in discussions like this, is probably going to generate more kind of hot takes. And this is not a bad thing. It's just kind of a thing. I think that Georgia's going to generate more hot takes, more chatter, more discussion than maybe almost any other team in the SEC, because obviously, if Daniels is going to make good, not a prediction that he gives there, but stating of a goal, if he's going to make good on that intended goal, then as I said before, do you know how good of a quarterback you have to be in college football right now to win a national championship? Look at what Mac Jones did this past season. Look at what Joe Burrow did the year before that. Look at what Trevor Lawrence did the year before that. You've got national championships in each of the last year averaging more than 40 points per game. And in the case of Joe Burrow, a guy that became a number one overall pick. Trevor Lawrence is going to be a number one overall pick this year, and who knows how high Mac Jones ends up getting drafted. That's kind of the blueprint for how you win a national championship. You've got to have historically good quarterback. You've got to have that level of play. Prior to the 2018 season, you could kind of get away, it seems like, with kind of a good quarterback there in that role. You could be somewhat inexperienced and still be able to be in that championship discussion. We saw some examples of that. The last 3 years, though, that's not what quarterback play has looked like for the eventual national champion. And there are some people who look at the situation at Georgia. Mostly these are non-Georgia fans, of course, that say this. But there are some people who look at that situation at Georgia and say, I just don't think Kirby Smart's capable of getting that done, either because he's unwilling to allow the offense to evolve in that direction. He's maybe just incapable of kind of seeing the vision for that, the way that Ed Orgeron allowed Joe Brady to shine in 2019, the way that Nick Saban allowed Steve Sarkisian to shine this past year, that Kirby Smart's just not ready at this stage of his career to be able to do that. There are a lot of Georgia fans who would then conversely say, why wouldn't that be the case for Georgia? Why wouldn't Kirby Smart observe the way in which everything has kind of gone down over these last couple of years and join in that and be a part of that himself? There's no lid on this Georgia program that prevents that from happening, but a lot of non-Georgia fans feel like they think that Georgia's been here before. And so as I said a moment ago, this is going to be the place where like the most fertile soil for these kind of debates goes down. Kirby Smart proving that he really is. You saw on the video screen a moment ago, shaking hands with Ed Orgeron there in the 2019 SEC Championship game. Orgeron, who's as kind of cut from the old school football mind, football guy status as almost anybody is, but Orgeron let his offense do its thing in 2019. There's been some really good, stuff out there with Nick Saban over the last couple of days about how much he's just been forced to confront the idea that the notion of playing great defense and running the football, that's just not what football is anymore. And Saban, built his entire career on that. 2011, 2012 national championships were almost solely built on being a good running team, being great defense. The quarterback for Alabama in those years, with all due respect, a little bit of an afterthought. But the things have changed since then. And folks are very curious to see if Georgia's going to be able to change with that. So we'll obviously keep following that. But interesting to hear JT Daniels not pulling any punches about what the expectation for Georgia this upcoming season. He says it's time to win a national championship there at UGA. He does not use the George Pickens injury as an excuse for why that can't happen. I did kind of edit this part of the audio out just for the sake of time. That the notion that Pickens, potential big-time wide receiver that's injured and is going to be out for at least most of the season, if not all the season, given a chance to say, hey, it makes things a lot tougher. JT Daniels actually went the other direction and said, no, we ought to be able to, even with the team we have right now, mitigate the loss of Pickens, work around that, and still be dynamic offensively. If you're a Georgia fan, that kind of bold proclamation from Daniels, I think, is a pretty good thing. It's SEC Country Live here on the SEC Country Facebook and the SEC Country Live YouTube page. Happy to have you with us. And for folks who like SEC talk, for folks who want to get together in the comments section, let them know we're doing this show each and every Wednesday at 3 p.m. We're just a couple of minutes away. We're going to welcome in Dave Bartu from College Football Matrix. Dave, a really good kind of analytics-minded guy. He sees a big breakout year from one of the SEC's quarterbacks. We'll tell you about that more coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, speaking of quarterbacks, and speaking of Texas A&M, a team that we mentioned a moment ago, I think it's really interesting to see from CBSSports.com, 2-round mock draft that came out really just in the last couple of days here. And one of the guys who seems to be climbing up draft boards at the moment, let me give credit to the mock draft author here from CBSSports.com. This is from Ryan Wilson, CBSSports.com. And one of the guys who's flying up draft boards right now seems to be Texas A&M quarterback Kellen Mond, who Wilson from CBSSports.com has going now in the second round to the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's kind of the heir apparent to, obviously, Ben Roethlisberger there at Pittsburgh. This, to me, is really interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think this is not quite as – this is a pretty big departure from where I think folks originally thought Kellen Mond was going to go. Kellen Mond, I think, at one point in time was kind of getting a little bit more of a tab as a potential mid-round guy, fourth-round pick, something along those lines. All of a sudden now this is one voice from CBSSports.com, but it does echo some of the other stuff that's been out there. There have been rumors as of late that Mond and Josh McDaniels, the Patriots offensive coordinator, had connected closely together, that there has been some talk here about all of a sudden in these pro day type evaluations, pre-draft type evaluations, teams are liking what they're seeing from Kellen Mond, that he could be climbing draft boards. And, on this show, we're kind of interested in more than just, who's going to be good at the, at the NFL level, because this is not an NFL show. There are plenty of NFL shows. This is not an NFL show. On a show like this, what we're mostly interested in is how this impacts college football. And if Mond ends up going in the second round, here's the way I think this impacts the SEC. A guy like that going ahead of a guy like, say, Kyle Trask at Florida. And listen, if you go back and watch SEC talk over the course of I'm talking about anywhere, SEC Network, other streaming video shows, radio, whatever else, think about all the love that Dan Mullen has gotten as Florida's coach, that Dan Mullen has gotten as a architect of offense, as a diabolical play caller, as a quarterback whisperer he's been commonly called. But it seems like a lot of the love that Mullen has gotten in SEC circles, the guy who ought to be getting that praise, actually, to me, is Jimbo Fisher. First of all, Fisher's got a much better head-to-head record against Mullen, beat him this past season. Jimbo Fisher has put a ton of guys into the NFL, first-round picks. He's got a long track record of doing that. And if his guy, Kellen Mond, goes ahead of Kyle Trask in the upcoming NFL draft, wouldn't that be another nod in Fisher's direction? I think it's really interesting that, and we talked about A&M a little bit earlier. I think it's really interesting how much of the rise of Jimbo Fisher there at Texas A&M has kind of gone uncovered. And maybe it's just because in College Station, Texas, you're kind of too far away from the overall nucleus of the SEC, that you're just kind of too far from all of that. But to me, it seems like the guy who ought to be getting more of the nod as kind of quarterback whisperer, a guy who's done something with his quarterbacks, is a guy like Fisher, because whether it's his time as head coach at Florida State and all the potential first round picks that he had there, or his time as offensive coordinator at LSU prior to that, where he worked with guys in some cases, not guys who thrived at the NFL level, but certainly he was good enough to put him into the first round. It seems like, Fisher ought to be getting some credit here if Kellen Mond really does launch up the draft boards the way that it seems that he might. We'll take some of your comments on this in just a moment. Before that, though, as promised, let me kind of bring in Dave Bartu into the conversation. Many of you know Dave on social media or online as a part of College Football Matrix, kind of breaking down the sport from an analytics standpoint. A terrific voice doing all those kinds of things. He joins us here on SEC Country Live here today. Dave, thanks for being a part of the program. I really appreciate your time.
Dude, you got my number down there. I can't get rid of you. Just give me a call anytime. We'll talk football.
I'm glad to be able to do that. Let me bring you in on what we're just discussing, and we'll kind of see where the conversation goes there after that. So when I look at a couple quarterbacks, or I should say a couple coaches in the SEC, I see more media attention for a guy like Dan Mullen for what he's done with the quarterbacks, maybe less so for a guy like Jimbo Fisher. But I don't think there's any doubt that over the course of their career, I think Fisher's been the better guy when it comes to developing quarterbacks. And if you're going to tout a guy in the SEC as a, who's a coach on the rise and who's leading his program along the way for doing that, to me, it ought to be Fisher who's getting that love more so than Dan Mullen. What do you say about that?
I think they're on paper, because you know me, I tell stories with numbers. I'm not an X and O's guy. I don't watch film. I'm not that guy. So it's always on paper for me. And Dan Mullen and Fisher, side by side for their careers, you look at it as a whole, they're about the same guy. They've had some good years. They've had some bad years. They're above average overall, but in terms of quarterback development, win-loss ratios, you name it, it's pretty much the same guy. I think they're really interchangeable. So I don't really see giving one or the other an edge in terms of what you're saying, like quarterback development or even play calling as an offensive coordinator. To me, I think quarterback development is two things. It is a factor, certainly, of the coaching around the program. But I think it's kind of like students. I think they rise to the occasion, and I think a good quarterback, no matter where they're at, is going to become a good quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. One of the things we've not really seen in the SEC West in kind of the Nick Saban era is that permanent rival for him. LSU pops up in 2019, kind of disappears in 2020. Auburn 2017 gets the win, but kind of wasn't able to maintain that momentum. We've now seen in the last year A&M kind of take that step forward. They have the one-loss season. They did not play well against Alabama, obviously head-to-head. But do you see Jimbo, because he's won a national championship, and there aren't very many active coaches who can say they've done that, do you see Jimbo as potentially being a little bit more of a long-term threat to Alabama than what previous rivals of Saban in the SEC West have been able to do?
I don't know, man. Is anything really a threat to Alabama right now? I mean, seriously. I mean, it's every rule that you could think of that I can come up with. It seems like Alabama has broken it. The lose 8 out of 11 starters on offense. Boom, national championship the next year. Who the hell does that? I mean, it's like college football is Alabama's world, and we're living in it. But with A&M, okay, the first thing you got to look at is recruited talent. Period. Okay, A&M has moved into the third slot in the West behind Alabama and LSU. They're top 10 in the country. They have a national championship level profile of talent. That's where you win these things, is from 1 through 10. So the first step is, do they have the talent to be a pain in the butt to Alabama? Absolutely. Okay. Now, do they have the coaching to do that? I think they have a above-average offensive coordinator in Fisher, we just talked about. Defensive coordinator, Elko had his worst year last year, but overall for his career, he is an excellent defensive coordinator. So I do feel your question, I do believe the answer to it is, yes, they can be a viable pain in the butt going forward. I don't know how big of a pain in the butt they're going to be. I think they were really overrated this last year. Their offense and defense were both outside the top 50 in offensive and defensive scoring efficiency. So I think there's some consistency that needs to be worked out for them to be that consistent threat going forward.
You and I talked before the show here today, and you brought up a name that I thought was really interesting. It sounds like you have big expectations this year for Ole Miss quarterback Matt Corral. Is that because of what you see from Corral as a player, or is that because of the respect that you have for Lane Kiffin's offense?
Neither. I don't care about Lane Kiffin's offense, and I told you I don't watch film. It's all in the numbers. Mm-hmm. And so when I say I would take a healthy Matt Corral in the draft right now over Mond, over Trask, over Jones, it is because of two things. One, by coming back, he's going to get more games under his belt. Okay? You look at all the NFL starters right now. Outside of Cam Newton, and he's a questionable NFL starter, none of them started fewer than 24 games in college. Okay? Mac Jones, 15. Trey Lance, 15. Mond started a bunch of them. Now, the other factor is, how much did you elevate your team above expectations? Well, you can't do that at Alabama, so it's probably why a lot of Alabama quarterbacks fail. All right? Mond really didn't accelerate it above expectations. They did what was expected of them, but with Corral at Mississippi, he completely exceeded expectations last year. So the big question mark is, can he do it again this year? So if you see Matt Corral having another year where he pushes Ole Miss over the envelope of expectations, and whatever that is, 6-6, 7-5, 8-4, you add 2 games to those numbers, that is somebody that is pushing the envelope of being a higher potential, lower-risk NFL starter than those other 3 guys everybody's talking about right now.
In our Facebook comment section, Jeff Barber is expressing some skepticism about Georgia this upcoming season. We talked some Georgia a little earlier. How daunting is the task when you haven't been scoring at the 40-plus point a game clip the way that Alabama did a year ago, LSU did the year before that? Clemson has kind of done regularly the last couple of years. Georgia wanting to be a title team, it seems almost certain they have to do that, and yet their offense has been a couple paces behind all of that. How daunting is the task to match those numbers for this upcoming season with JT Daniels and all the talent that's in place there, but the track record just doesn't support that? What's the outlook for Georgia here in your mind?
Well, from where they're at, I think the first thing you got to start, remember what we talked about, y'all, if you're going to compete for a national title, you got to start with the talent. Top 3 recruiter the last 4 years after attrition. Boom, box checked. Okay, what about their division? Well, Florida's got a new quarterback. South Carolina's going to have no offense. Missouri, big question mark. Kentucky should be. I mean, it's an easy division, all things considered. Tennessee, new coaching staff. Everything is in their favor from that standpoint. Defensively, with Smart, you expect them to be good. Now, offensively, this is where I think it really gets interesting, is that JT Daniels off the field, not playing for Georgia, scoring efficiency for the offense was 114th last year. On the field, it was 14th. So if you're a Georgia fan looking for some hope that the offense turns around, although Daniels didn't play a lot of games, the scoring efficiency when he was in there was very, very good.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to think about. We'll get ready to kind of finish up with this. When you look around the rest of college football for a moment, I think one of the complaints that you commonly hear is the sport's become a little too easy to predict. You sort of always pencil in Clemson out of the ACC. It's fairly easy to, kind of pencil in Ohio State out of the Big Ten, although not always a rubber stamp. And, whatever the SEC champion's going to be. A lot of folks just want to see a surprise around college football, something that doesn't feel like a predetermined outcome the way that so much of these playoff appearances have the last last few years. Do you see anything on the horizon with that, or is it these same teams that have been dominating recruiting are going to continue to kind of dominate when it comes to these playoff appearances? What is your kind of national outlook here? Obviously, still several months before the season begins.
Sure, it's really never changed. I mean, the formula I put out 20 years ago was really simple. It was be a top 10 recruiter over the previous 4 years and have a top 25 scoring efficiency team the previous year. All your national champions have that profile, except one, Clemson. They were the number 12 recruiter when Deshaun Watson took them to the national title game and won it. But outside of that, you just go with your top 10. Now, every once in a while, you're going to get a surprise. Auburn was top 10 with Cam Newton. Nobody saw that coming, but the talent was there, and Newton was generational. Okay, so I think if you're going to get a surprise that's not your Alabama, that's not your Ohio State, that's not your Georgia or your Oklahoma, it's going to be that top 10 recruiter, kind of like LSU, catching lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
We're going to look back on Ed Orgeron and go, how the hell did he do that? I mean, he found Joe Brady in an elevator, Joe Burrow, everything just came together, but see, the talent was there to begin with, top 5 recruiter. So if you're looking for that surprise, don't look to the teams that don't recruit well. You have to look at that top 10 and try to find your surprise in that group.
Dave, where can SEC fans find the work that you're doing online, the college football analysis that you provide? How can they get more of you?
Sure, Twitter, CFB Matrix, and just type in my last name, Bartu, on Google. You will find me. And for anybody who just, hey, look, if you just want to talk some football, you got a text, you want a question, and heck, you might have coaches, ADs listening right now, I'll give them a number. Write it down, 503-504-8710. Hit me. I will try to get back to you as soon as I can because I love talking to everybody about college football.
Dave, thanks for being here. I certainly appreciate your time.
Peace, brother. Thank you for having me on.
Good stuff there. Dave Bartu, College Football Matrix, as he said. That's an analytics guy that's been doing this for a long time. Weighing in there with some very interesting thoughts on the SEC using what appeared to be kind of a one half of a walkie-talkie when it comes to the cell phone. Our buddy Connor Riley, who's producing the show today, was working overdrive to try to find some sort of way to kind of get the volume just right so the phone wouldn't pop. So for those of you who are dealing with that, I certainly apologize for that. By the way, Esteban Esteves in our Facebook comment section, I said before that Georgia's going to be that kind of like fertile ground for hot takes. Esteban, who's an LSU fan, says, knowing Georgia, and that's what Dave was just talking about a moment ago, they're going to play to the level of their opponents, get worked over in the SEC championship and playoffs. So LSU fans kind of weighing in on that. We'll do this every Wednesday at 3 p.m., a chance for all the SEC fans kind of go back and forth with each other. But to wrap up today's show, we like to kind of do something a little bit fun on the way out the door. We call it our SEC LOL, and certainly some SEC fans had a chance to LOL a little bit over the course of the Easter weekend related to Lincoln Riley, the Oklahoma coach, who either just got a new Big Green Egg or just got a new, whatever his smoker of choice is. Apparently not all of that experience when it comes to all this kind of stuff. He says happy Easter here, and he shows what has to be the driest looking brisket I have ever seen in my life. I mean, he burnt this thing worse than Oklahoma burned Florida in the bowl game. This is awful looking. And a lot of SEC fans had a lot of fun related to this in the comment section of this particular tweet. First of all, I can't stand that people are always like, social mediaing pictures of their food as it is. So I think that Riley deserves everything that he gets. SEC fans were all over this one. The very burned up brisket from Lincoln Riley. That's a lot of fun there. A lot of SEC fans were kind of going back and forth with all of that. Speaking of going back and forth, thanks for doing that with us here today on SEC Country Live. I'll look forward to taking more of your comments again next week on YouTube and on Facebook there as well, as we just chat and talk about everything related to what's happening around the SEC, the big news, the preview of the upcoming season, and everything else. It's every Wednesday, 3 p.m. on the SEC Country Facebook, on SEC Country Live on YouTube. Thanks for making it fun. We'll look forward to seeing you back here again next week.